Massachusetts lawmakers considering a 140-page gun control bill that would ban ghost guns from our streets.
And now the legislation is facing pushback from some in the law enforcement community. Western Mass News reporter Maria Wilson joins us live in studio with the story. Maria?
Chris, Abby, state lawmakers are hoping to vote on a bill that would address how people are getting weapons and where they can carry them. The bill would crack down on ghost guns, which at this point are untraceable. Under the proposed legislation, both the barrel of the gun and the receiver would need to be serialized and registered. And as lawmakers continue to debate the specifics of the bill, Northwestern District Attorney David Sullivan says there is one thing that everyone can agree on.
Differences of opinion in parts of the bill, but I think what everybody's unified about is ghost guns. Those are the guns that get produced by a 3D printer, and we need to address that. We need to make it illegal for people to import or to make guns in Massachusetts for these type of weapons that many times are on the streets with no ability to identify who made them or where they came from. I wouldn't rely on those weapons. Sometimes they disintegrate after one or two uses, but those one or two uses can be lethal to the community.
Where Police Chief Sean Carvier agrees that outlawing ghost guns and requiring all firearms to have a serial number is beneficial. But other than that, he says that he is against the bill. Chief Carrier says that Massachusetts has already strong laws when it comes to gun control. One part of the bill, Chief Carvier says, is particularly concerning is how it would establish safe zones, making it illegal to carry firearms like in houses of worship and other public spaces.
The bill's a travesty when you prohibit the assistance that the police can get from legal licensed gun owners. It's always nice knowing that police and citizens can carry in certain areas where if something does happen, you can have that.
And we have learned that this bill is still underway. State Representative Carlos Gonzalez tells Western Mass News the decision has been pushed, any action on this legislation to the fall session. Reporting live in studio, Maria Wilson, Western Mass News.